At brunch, my daughter-in-law announced, "We've decided not to invite you to Christmas." I just nodded. My name is Mary Beth Ellison, and I am 71 years old. I live alone in Briarwood Hollow, a sleepy little village where the snowfall is thicker than memory. If you're listening to this on a cold evening in a kitchen with only the ticking of a clock and an empty teapot, we might not be that far away. I used to be known as Mum Grandma, the woman who never forgot a birthday and always showed up for holidays. However, this year, for the first time, I was not invited to Christmas. Not because I did anything bad, but because I'd been around for so long that I'd faded into the background and no one noticed. I am not telling this tale to complain. I'm telling you this because maybe there's someone else out there who has waited for a call that never came. An empty chair at the table, an unopened present, and a mother who once believed that if I was good enough, they'd still need me. If that's you, remain with me for a bit. I'll tell you about the winters I've survived, and how I learnt one of the simplest, most difficult lessons of all: reserve a seat for yourself. That winter, it all started on a frigid Sunday morning in the cafe I frequented, when I overheard the remark that altered everything. "We've spoken about it. Hallie made it clear that you would not be coming for Christmas this year." I nodded, as if it wasn't worth putting my coffee down for. Fern and hearth looked just like it usually did on the Sunday before Christmas, crowded yet comfortable in that meticulous manner. Red brick walls covered with dried wreaths, with small string lights, shining weakly more beautiful than warm. The chairs were still upholstered in the smooth white leather borders, which were little worn, but always immaculate. I chose my customary seat by the window to watch the town's Christmas tree in front of the post office, which was still only 2 fading ribbons and a dull silver star as it is every year. I arrived early and ordered a cappuccino as always. Ellie, the young waitress with a dimple on her left cheek, didn't have to ask. "Still going with the strawberry muffin, ma'am?" She grinned and laid the tray down as if I were a regular on her shift. I nodded. "Thank you, sweetie." On mornings like these, her grin was the only thing that kept me from feeling absolutely lost. Hallie arrived first, always on time, as exact as a minute hand. Travis moved slowly as if he hadn't entirely recovered from the previous night. He sat before unwrapping his scarf. Hallie drew her chair out with purpose, back straight, beige turtleneck hands resting on the menu she had never glanced at. I didn't bother asking how they were. These types of mornings were not designed for catching up. Just arrived, ordered, announced, and left. Hallie did not wait for the drinks to arrive. She said without hesitation, "We've spoken about it. You will not be coming for Christmas this year." I nodded again, like if I had said it to myself before she did. Travis gave me a brief glance before returning his attention to the table. Hallie continued, as if she needed to finish the explanation to make it official. "Becca is at the age when she requires more privacy. We decided to try something simpler this year, with just ourselves and the kids. Jonah is still little, so he will not notice. But Becca—" I nodded again, not in agreement, simply to complete the phrase. Nobody touched my muffin. It sat there, still warm, next to coffee that was already half gone. I stood up. "I presume I'll be paying for myself." I took out my wallet and placed the precise change next the plate, taking care not to drop a single cent. Ellie returned just then, bearing a dish of miniature gingerbread cookies. She stated they were handcrafted and available for you to take home. I gazed at her. This time I did not nod. I do not need it. "Thank you." Nobody stopped me. Nobody reached out. No weird looks. I exited the cafe like someone stepping out of a play with no more lines for them. And I hadn't finished this chapter. I'd only just begun. The chilly air outdoors hurt my flesh. The sidewalk had previously been salted, but patches of dull grey ice shimmered underfoot like unhealed wounds. I walked slowly, not because my legs were weak, but because there was nothing to hurry to. People brushed past on purpose. Everyone seemed to be on their way someplace warm, either to the post office, the bakery, or simply home. Not me. I walked to the hill where my automobile was parked. I hadn't walked this stretch of December in 12 years when Becca was in preschool, and I picked her up twice a week. Back then, Hallie appeared grateful. She used to refer to me as the one who kept traditions alive. I recall her once offering me a thermos of chocolate and saying, "Thanks for coming early, Mum. I arrived early today too. Only this time nobody needed me." They came to make a decision. I came to receive it. When Travis was in 3rd grade, I would take him to the second-hand bookshop around the block. He had looked at the ceiling map so long that I had to return and purchase it, now tacked to the front window, 60% off, and moving shortly. Everything is drifting away from the locations I once called home. I paused and peered inside, not because I wanted a book, but because I needed an excuse not to continue going. Something inside of me had severed a thread that had formerly connected me to the picture of the mother, the grandma who always appeared. It snapped, and no one glanced back. It's weird to realize that your presence no longer fits into anyone's plans. It does not cause severe pain. It's just hollow, like walking into a familiar room and seeing everything still in place but for you. I dug inside my backpack and took out my keys. My hands trembled slightly, not due to age, but because my blood was still attempting to recover its beat after Hallie's coolness. She did not shout. She did not disrespect me. She just didn't invite me to Christmas. And somehow that was enough to completely transform the season. Travis did not protect me. He simply sat there, like a chair that had always belonged in that area. Perhaps he felt quiet, kept the peace. Perhaps he believed I was too strong to be wounded. Nobody paused to question if I had sentiments of my own. I've always been the one to give up my seat ice, the cake with extra icing, and bake the turkey without onions, since Hallie is allergic. I was always the easy choice until they decided I didn't deserve to be considered at all. I heard a wind chime behind me, and someone opened the cafe door. The fragrance of cinnamon buns wafted out. I did not turn back. I did not walk in. And as I stood at my car, one line came to me as clearly as if it had been spoken in my ear. No one recalls that I constructed their first house. I walked carefully down the cold curb, not because my legs were tired, but because there was nothing waiting for me on the other side. I arrived home to a silent apartment with creaking floorboards and an unopened present box on the attic shelf, as if this year would be the same as the last. Throughout those winters, the box had become part of a ritual I'd never considered questioning. I never received an official invitation to Christmas, not once. But every year I planned gifts a month in advance. Nobody ever mentioned, "Mum, we would love for you to come." No one asked what dish you wanted for the Thanksgiving dinner. I created a list. Year after year, each gift was meticulously wrapped in snow-patterned paper and fastened with silver or red ribbons depending on my mood. Becca preferred soft presents, so I chose scarves. Jonah adored Legos. I looked high and low for the police set he desired. Hallie always got something for the kitchen, like a juicer or a set of mugs with laser-etched names. Travis seldom unwrapped his present in front of me. But every year I left him a black wool scarf and a Home Depot gift card in a different package. Nobody ever said thank you, but I did not wait for it. Back then, I felt that remembering someone was enough. I never considered being invited. I simply assumed I was intended to be there. Every year in the beginning of December, I'd go for the attic ladder and step by step take down the Christmas box, even if I knew I might not need anything inside. Perhaps I had gotten accustomed to preparing as if failing to do so would make it easier for them to forget I existed. I opened the box. Each ornament was wrapped in faded newspaper. Some had lost their sheen. Some had microscopic fissures that appeared to have been delicately brushed by time. I cleaned them clean with a dry towel. The aroma of dried pine from the sprigs buried at the bottom wafted up, evoking memories of previous winters. When I lived with Travis's father, we would get a real tree higher than 6 feet. Every morning, sap would collect on the floor below it. Hallie used to refer to me as the season's keeper. I didn't ask Travis any questions the year he lost his construction job. I contacted the bank and transferred $5,000 to his account. There was no name or message, and the subject was never raised again. But I knew it helped that Becca got new shoes the same month and Travis no longer had to deliver at night. Hallie waited 3 days at home after giving birth to Jonah before phoning me. "Could you please prepare something for us?" I cooked oatmeal with mashed apples and dropped it off every evening, leaving it in the refrigerator and never going inside. They stated that they needed space. I nodded. I've been using those nods for so long that I can't recall the last time someone inquired whether I wanted anything. I believe I was engineered to be right on the edge, as long as I didn't take up too much space. That afternoon, I headed to Page and Pine, the bookshop, trying to find something to give Becca. When she was 6 years old, she wrote me a little note. "Grandma, don't forget the peppermint candies. I adore it." I had that card in my wallet for over 2 years. I'm not sure she even remembers how peppermint smells. The shop was quiet, with a hint of pine wood and fresh paper in the air. A small bell hung on the window, making you feel as if nothing in the world needed to rush. Evelyn, the owner, still wore the large scarf. Her eyes squinted into a grin when she noticed me. "Looking for a present for your grandchildren again?" "Hi, Miss Marybeth." I nodded and then paused. No, not today. I hadn't chosen anything yet. I stood silently for a long examining the children's department. Hardcover books lined up reindeer Santa gingerbread guys, everything neatly arranged. I used to read one to Travis over 40 years ago, on the night before Christmas. I don't recall much of the narrative, except that he yawned when I got to the flying reindeer portion. He preferred actual stuff. I, on the other hand, wanted to preserve the enchantment that winter had left behind. Evelyn brought me a cup of tea and inclined her head. "We're seeking for a storyteller on Saturday mornings. The kids arrive in pajamas and sit under the tree. It is a thrill." I smiled slightly. "Do you think I could be a storyteller?" "You are the most natural one," I know, she added without a pause. "People are drawn to the way you talk, which is leisurely and soothing." I didn't respond, simply reaching for a book with a deep blue cover. I used to read books to my children every night during my first few years of motherhood, but no one other than my family ever asked me to do anything. I sat down on the cushioned seat near the window. Outside, snow began to fall again, light, gentle, and silent. Inside, the sound of pages moving and a faint chiming provided a peaceful background. And I understood there is a world in which I do not need to earn my position via gifts, silence, or sacrifice. It's only that I've never dared to walk into it. I left the shop with nothing. Evelyn handed me a leaflet outlining the storytelling timetable. I tucked it inside my coat pocket. No promises or refusals. I walked home. The wind had become colder than it had been that morning. The flat was dark, with no one waiting. Last year's present package remained on the table undisturbed. I opened my notepad. As in previous years, the page was blank with no appointments or shopping lists. I stared at my fingertips, which were creased with gentle wrinkles, and no longer fast, but stable enough to draw a single line in precise, careful strokes. This year, I plan to bring nothing and see who still invites me. I sat there for a while. Perhaps it's time to take stock of what I've given and ask what's left for me. I used to be an accountant. I recall every dollar. But before this week, I had never utilized that expertise to count how much I had given away. I printed the bank statements and arranged them on the old dining table, which now acts as my workplace. The maple wood has scratches from when I dropped a dish last year. A red pen stood next to my iPad, and a cup of coffee had been cold since the morning. I wasn't doing this to blame anyone. I just needed to know how much of my life I'd given to others, without ever being acknowledged. First and foremost, we'll fund the $200 per month for internet for the next 4 years, as Hallie promised. Mum, just maintain the account in your name so it doesn't get closed. I don't recall if I nodded or simply remained silent. Regardless, the sum came to £9.600. Travis's basement flooded the next year, necessitating more house repairs. I held the insurance and paid the $14,500 premium up front. The down payment on Hallie's automobile was $6,200. Summer lessons for Becca cost $1,800. The emergency hospital cost for Jonah's high fever 2 winters ago was $3,200. And it doesn't even include the food toys and power bills that I secretly paid. I organized it all into a simple spreadsheet with rows for each item and columns for each year. The ultimate figure is £276,800. I gazed at that figure for a long time, not because of the amount, but because I had no idea how much I could give and yet survive. Not comfortably, but simply surviving without feeling as if I had anything left. My phone rested silently on the table. I hit the button and left a voicemail for the law firm I'd used for years. I need to cancel all regular transfers and request a review of my authorizations. My hand did not tremble. It was just silent. That afternoon, I dropped into Maple Bean, a little cafe that still serves toast crisp on both sides, just as it did when I worked with Circle's retiring accountants. The tables are spherical pieces of steel. The waitress still recalls that I prefer peppermint tea over coffee. Silas was already there, his hair more grey than the last time, yet his back remained straight. We'd collaborated on a couple fundraisers following retirement. As I sat down, he mentioned that he had heard you were considering reconsidering your will. I nodded. I believe it is time to clarify what my share actually means. Silas did not press. He just pulled out his notepad and handed me a page. I generally write this down for retirees, but I believe it better suits you. They did not invite you because you were not deserving. They didn't invite you because they figured you'd stroll in anyhow. I gave a quick laugh. Maybe I walked in too frequently. We sat for a little longer without saying much. Sometimes retired individuals know how to help without intruding. Silas requested a second iced lemon tea. I didn't receive anything else. I used to believe that if I didn't assist, they'd struggle. I added as the soft restaurant lights dimmed in the late afternoon. Silas didn't respond. He only nodded slowly. I departed before it became absolutely dark. The snow had not started again. I walked a short distance down Main Street. Christmas lights were already draped around the lampposts. At the nearby bank, an elderly woman sat at the counter counting monies from a little cotton purse. Her gloves were fraying. The plastic cup next to her had a damaged rim. She didn't glance at anybody, instead, focusing on her duties. I stood and observed for a minute, not out of sympathy, but because I understood her. Perhaps she too was once the one who always prepared, made sacrifices, and said yes. And then one day, nobody needed it anymore. Nobody pulled her away. They simply didn't save her a seat. Back at home, I opened my filing cabinet. 3 savings folders. I included a 4th for myself. In any case, I transferred $12,000 into it. Nobody knew. Nobody needed to. It's just me. And for the first time, I didn't seek anyone's permission. Night fell slowly. The breeze whistled softly against the windows, but the antique desk lamp kept the room cozy. When I turned it on, a gentle yellow illumination swept across the wrinkles on my hands, and the bill with my name printed on the top. For the first time in years, I removed my own name from the family ledger. I closed the folder and stared out the foggy window. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to stay in a location where people kept me only because I was familiar. I did not write a parting note. There are no farewell words. I just returned the Kia keys to the cabin, which used to be mine, and drove away as snow began to fall along the roadside. The lodge is located by Large Pine Lake, where the pine forest grows thicker than memory. It's only a 20-minute trip from town, but I drove carefully as if my automobile didn't want to disrupt the peace that awaited us. When I pulled the door open, the smell of ancient wood and last year's fire enveloped me. Nothing has changed since no one had arrived since last winter. I wondered whether Hallie remembered that here was where we celebrated Becca's first Thanksgiving. Probably not. She favors homes with good Wi-Fi and bigger drives. I gradually violet the fireplace with old newspapers and dry wood stored in the container. The fire started with a gentle crackling like a breath. The hardwood floor creaked beneath my heels in a manner that felt welcoming. I placed my backpack on the worn-out sofa, then entered the bedroom and drew back the curtains. The light streamed in, dimly and softly. No one knew I was here, not because I was angry, but because for the first time, I wanted to choose a location for myself without explanation or permission. That afternoon, I strolled down the dirt route to the end-of-season farmers' market. The booths were smaller now, with heaters humming weakly beneath the counters. I grabbed a bag of golden apples and stopped by the baked goods counter. The woman next to me looked up, and I knew her, Colleen Meyer. We attended high school together and exchanged letters when she moved north. She has been living alone since her spouse died. I once heard that her son attempted to sell her house without her consent. She brought him to court, but maintained her cottage. Colleen noticed me immediately, quickly. Mary Beth. I nodded. She displayed a bag of apple pastries. They still taste the same. And really, we don't need anything new at our age, do we? We each bought a share and walked back to our cottage. I made hot chocolate, made hot. She sat on the wooden stairs, hands resting on her knees, as if she gardened every day. I added the cocoa to 2 brown ceramic cups. My hands shook slightly from the steam. Colleen accepted hers without a word. We sat on opposite sides of the steps, backs to the entryway, facing the snow-covered forest. Nobody mentioned children. There was no mention of unsent letters or unanswered phone calls. No one questioned why the other had ended up in a winter cottage thus far away. Perhaps simply being present is sufficient for comprehension at a certain age. Explanations just make the pain worse. Colleen gazed out at the lake, which was now coated with a thin layer of ice with the evening light cutting across it, like a calm blade of orange. I kept the cabin, she replied, but I couldn't maintain the solitude. I turned toward her. She wasn't looking at me, only shouting into the wind. You may live alone, but what about the absence of footsteps? You can still hear it. I understood what she meant. There are evenings when the heater emits a harmless sound that echoes like someone speaking my name in a dream. Not because it is chilly, but because there is no voice at all. We did not talk for a time. The woodland rustled gently like distant waves from a faraway sea. I told Colleen about the cottage, which my husband constructed himself with his own choice of foundation stones. We camped here during the first summer following our wedding. Travis learned to climb trees in the little forests behind this location. Once he fell and shattered his arm. I screamed in the emergency room when they bandaged it. I felt I'd never forgive the cabin for allowing him to get harmed. But I returned, every year, every winter. Colleen laughed. Children never take care of things that they did not pay for. I grinned. Then we keep them, not to hold it against them, but to hang on to what remains of ourselves. I was not sure whether she understood what I was saying, but I didn't need her to. That sentence was for me, a simple commitment from someone who previously overlooked her own value. The sun fell lower. Colleen stood and waved. There are no guarantees to see each other again. But that wasn't necessary. People who live to this age understand how to return when it matters. I collected the cups, folded the blanket, and locked the windows. The wind picked up outside, but the fire inside remained glowing. I placed my coat on the wooden peg beside the entrance. A moment later, there was a knock. I opened it. It was Mr. Rourke, my neighbour from across the hill. He clutched a wax paper-wrapped container of oatmeal cookies, said nothing, just nodded. I nodded back and accepted them. He remarked, "Welcome to the cold season," before turning to depart. I didn't call him back, but for the first time, my heart didn't feel like it was freezing in the air. I closed the cabin door from inside. The fire buzzed, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I never disclosed the address. But on a snowy morning, I noticed a familiar SUV parked outside the cabin's gate. It was the same silver-grey automobile with a high roof and fogged windows that Hallie had previously described as ideal for children and dogs. Travis's license plate remained the same one he picked when he was promoted in 2018. I stood near the window holding a teacup that was still warm. I did not move closer. I did not take a step back. I just stood still. They exited after a few minutes of deliberation. Hallie arrived first, dressed in a white coat and bearing a red ribbon-wrapped present package. Travis watched his face, which was inscrutable behind his knit cap. Becca donned a red sweater and carried something spherical made of pine leaves and tinsel. I opened the door just enough to let them in, but I did not walk outside. I merely uttered one sentence. "Come in. There is coffee. No hugging. No why are you here? Or we've been so concerned." I was not waiting for it. They made no pretense. Hallie placed the box of cookies on the wooden table in the center of the room. Travis looked around as if he were entering a place that was once his, but now had a new lock. Becca stood calmly near the tiny tree I'd constructed. No lights, just a few paper bows and dried pine cones from the garden. I poured some tea. I didn't inquire what they wanted. Hallie spoke first. "Mum, I understand how sudden it was. I mean, you're leaving." I did not react. Simply placed the teacup in front of her. "I thought you might just need some space. But Becca truly missed you." I turned to face Becca. She said nothing, but set her homemade wreath on the table, which had twisted wire pieces of cloth and two somewhat uneven paper snowflakes. I reached out, stroked it softly, and nodded. Travis sat down in a wooden chair near the fireplace. It had been a while since I'd seen him sit lower than me. He glanced at me for a time before saying gently, "You're leaving." Made me feel lost. I sat across from him, my fingers folded around my teacup. The only sound was the soft popping of firewood. I did not smile. I did not weep. "Nobody said anything while I was there," I said. I poured some more tea for myself. Now I'm silent, which is the problem. Nobody argued. Nobody defended themselves. Hallie moved forward. "I brought gingerbread. Becca chose the taste you prefer." I nodded, but did not open the package. I did not say thank you either. I've lived long enough to realize that not everything delivered to your door is love. The lovely light from the string lamps wrapped around the bookshelves made the room appear cozy, but nothing could soften the distance between me and them. I took up Becca's wreath and put it on the bedroom door with the same nail I'd used in previous Christmas seasons. She observed me, didn't say anything, and squeezed her lips together in the same way her mother does when she's trying not to weep. I sat back down. Travis looked out the window. "Mom, are you coming back?" I shake my head. "I understand," he muttered. "It's simply so vacant." I stared at him, this youngster who used to be afraid of the dark and would cling to me on Christmas night as the ice slipped from the roof. He now had a house, a wife and 2 children, but he still had no idea how much room a mother required. I didn't blame or forgive him. I merely spoke quietly, like if the wind were speaking for me. "I am not furious. I just don't follow directions anymore." Hallie hesitated as if something was stuck in her throat and wouldn't come out. Becca sat, quiet hands gripped firmly in her lap. Nobody said anything else, and I didn't want them to. Silence on a cold winter day was a sufficient answer. When they rose up, I did not accompany them to the door. I remained where I was, my hand resting on the table edge. I heard the crunch of snow beneath their footsteps, the vehicle door opening and closing again. But before the SUV drove away, I peered out the window. I noticed Becca turn her head. She beamed a grin that looked just like mine when I was 11. I really wasn't sure if that smile was intended for me. In any case, the visit closed a door and opened a road for me to pursue. I used to be called mum wife and grandmother. But nobody ever asked me what I wanted to be named that morning. I strolled on the stone walkway, covered with a thin sheen of ice arms, carrying a basket of cinnamon biscuits and an old book with folded edges. Snow was falling softly with small white flakes lying on the tops of my shoes and accumulating at the hem of my deep grey coat. The hand-knit scarf around my neck, still scented with baby shampoo, was given to me by Becca 2 years ago. Paige and Pine sat in the corner of town where everything seemed to slow down as the year came to a close. A gentle bell sounded when the door opened. Evelyn looked up from the counter. Mary Beth, she called, waving as if I was someone she had been waiting for. Nobody here knew how many dinners I'd had in quiet, sat at anonymous tables. Here I was, just the woman who brought cookies and some stories. The reading nook was immediately beside the window, which let in warm winter light through fogged glass. The kids sat in a circle on the rug, wearing bare-eared headbands. Tiny hands hold warm mugs of cocoa. I bent down and gently placed the cookie bag on the wooden side table before opening the book. The narrative I recounted that day had no princesses or dragons, simply an elderly woman living alone in a wooden cottage deep in the forest. She used to have a large family, but they gradually forgot how to knock. The kids listened with wide, calm eyes. They did not interrupt. They did not inquire why. They didn't need to know the woman's actual name. All they needed to know was that she was still there, lighting her fire and telling stories to the squirrels, wind, and pine trees. I talked in an equal tone, without theatrics or embellishment, as if I were reading to myself. When the narrative concluded, I distributed the cookies. Nobody inquired, "Who do you live with?" or "How old are your grandchildren?" They just asked, "Will you tell another one?" And I nodded like if I still had anything worth clinging on to. I stayed for a bit after the kids had left. Evelyn walked up and carefully placed a business card on the table. "We're searching for someone to share tales more frequently," she explained. "I know you're not one for titles, but if you like, I can print a tiny sign. Mary Beth Ellison, storyteller in residence." I chuckled a bit, not because of the title, but because it was the first time I'd seen my name published without any roles connected. That afternoon, I went around the neighborhood. The air was chilly enough to remind me that winter here is harsh, but moderate enough that I did not feel rushed. I stood outside the ancient flower store, did not buy anything, and simply inhaled the aroma. When I was someone's wife, I was too preoccupied to distinguish between the smells of tulips and lilies. I now understand, just as I am learning to distinguish between being loved and merely being required. When I returned to the cabin, I placed the empty basket on the wooden table, removed my coat, and relit the fire. The wreath Becca had fashioned was still on the table, dried but not broken. I put it in the window not for anybody to see, but to remind myself that I was still hanging on to something. That evening, I opened my old notebook, which has been with me since I arrived here. There are no expenditures, stated, no directions left behind, simply a few brief lines that look like footprints after a snowstorm. I wrote one more. Today, a tiny girl stated, "I tell stories like magic." Then I halted, not because the words were wonderful, but because I used to feel there was nothing left in me that could be termed magic. Now I understand that not all magic comes from magnificent places. It appears the minute you cease pretending to be someone else. The next morning, I returned to the bookshop, not because anybody begged me to, but because I liked the fragrance of fresh paper and the way people greet one another with genuine eyes. I signed the New Year card that Evelyn had posted to the store door. I did not add anything else. There's no grandmother, mother, or wife, simply Mary Beth. There's nothing more. I used to be called a variety of names, including wife, mother, grandmother, babysitter, meal maker, and the one who remembered everyone's birthday, even when no one remembered mine. I've never complained. I merely wondered if I was born to keep the fire blazing, to provide the backdrop that let others get through the winter seasons without feeling the coldness. I used to believe that love meant doing everything silently and without being questioned, like the Christmas tree, which stood tall before the children opened their eyes, like the pie that was already in the oven, despite the fact that no one had requested for it, like the money I took from my retirement savings and gave to Travis after he lost his job. No invoice or receipt, just a mother doing what mums do. I became accustomed to not being invited, but yet turning up, bringing everything with me: food presents and my silent presence. I assumed it was typical, as if my worth was determined by what I could offer, rather than whether anybody still wanted me there. And then one day I stopped being summoned, not because I had died, but because I was no longer needed. I recall the last time I nodded at breakfast. No complaint, no scowl. Just a nod, as if someone had severed the cord that bound me to the term family, and I sat there motionless. That day, I discovered that certain things depart without a sound, such as when you get up from the table and no one looks up to see you leave. As an accountant, I was always able to compute, but I never utilized that ability to tally up what I had contributed to my family. More than $270,000 without a single thank you. Not out of bitterness, but simply because I had to confront the plain, calm fact. Someone recently told me that while compassion is not always appreciated, dignity should never be abandoned. I moved to the old cabin not out of rage, but to start again. I swept the porch, piled the firewood, and put the faded drapes back in place. I sat with Colleen, a mother whose children had betrayed her, a woman who believed she'd become a shadow. Yet together, we kindled the fire-sipped warm chocolate and realized that we no longer needed to wait for someone else to light the match. When Travis and Hallie arrived, I was not angry. I just wasn't worried about being misunderstood anymore. I did not explain. I did not ask for forgiveness. I just sat and poured the tea. And when Becca brought me the little wreath she had fashioned herself, I grabbed onto it. Not because she was my granddaughter, but because she reminded me of the child I myself was yearning for someone to lay a hand on her shoulder and say, "You are enough. You've always been enough." I tell tales to the youngsters at Page and Pine, not for accolades, but because I still have something to offer, this time not out of obligation, but because I want to, and I share the story under my own name. No titles, no roles, it's just Mary Beth. And if you're listening to this narrative, perhaps in a quiet living room or while driving home, I'd want to ask you a question. When was the last time you did anything for yourself? Like a vintage quilt that kept the entire home warm throughout the winter. Until one day, when no one felt chilly, they folded it up and forgot how much they had relied on it. But what if that quilt could clean itself, soak up the sun, and wrap over its own shoulders? Perhaps then it would feel warmer than anybody had dreamed. Perhaps you were once that quilt, and if this story moves you, remember someone who once silently loved you. Perhaps your grandma, mother, or neighbor cooked you cookies the first Christmas in town. Do not wait another winter to discover this. Some hearts only remain when you remember to hang on to them,